everyone, and welcome back to the show, the Original Medicine Podcast. On today's episode, how clean eating is doing us dirty. I'm going to get into the Chinese medicine physiology so that you understand how Chinese medicine sees the body and the resources that we give it in order to help it build itself and protect you, and how modern diets that are aimed at becoming more healthy are actually making us more sick. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about low-fat diets, paleo and carnivore, and then also veganism. So let's dive into this and give you a new perspective about how that clean eating routine that you have been doing may not actually be serving you. And hopefully this helps you make some changes so that you can improve your own health. In Chinese medicine, we are looking at the body from most exterior to most interior. We're looking at the body from most exterior to interior, and the most exterior is called our sinew channels. Now, if you're an acupuncturist, I'm sure you've heard of sinew channels. Even if you don't actually use them and know much about them, you've seen them in the books that we had in school, but it just got kind of glazed over. The sinew channels are where the 6 stages happen, right? Tai-yang, Xiaoyang, Yangming, and so forth. And for non-acupuncturists, these are just different steps from the most exterior, getting closer and closer into the interior. And it's like a fortress. The sinews want to keep things out. So when you are exposed to, we'll call this a pathogen because that's how Chinese medicine thinks about it. This could be a virus, a bacteria, pollen. It could even be bad food that you ingested, that you ate something in a restaurant and it wasn't good, or even in your own kitchen, doesn't matter. The sinew's job is to push that back out. And this could happen through like a sweat, maybe a cough, vomiting, peeing, pooping. So if you find yourself doing any of these things frequently, a lot of times that is a sign that your sinews are trying to do something for you. They're trying to get something out and prevent you from actually getting sick. So it may feel like you're already sick, but that's actually the protection that you need to keep whatever it is to go from going in deeper. So what I want to talk about specifically in relation to how food affects this ability is there are 4 elements of what we call in Chinese medicine Wei Qi. And this is our defensive qi. Just like I was talking about, the sinews are trying to defend the exterior. They don't want anything coming in. So what the sinews need is enough rest to have good kidney yang. And just stay with me through some of these words because you're going to get it. I explain this to my patients all the time, and they always are like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So just go with it. Don't freak out if you hear these words that are like, what the hell? Okay, so kidney yang is good energy to push things out. We also need enough fluids. These are stomach fluids specifically. And the hydration that we need for the sinew channels is not simply water. The water is certainly important. We need warm, wet foods, deeply hydrating food, because we are going to take that pathogen with the energy that we have from the kidneys, and we're going to essentially float it out on the fluids that we have. And in order to do that, we also have to have a liver that has what it needs so it can be relaxed and not constrain the process as the body tries to push out the pathogen. And then the last thing that I'm thinking about is the lung qi has to be what we call diffusing. It has to be moving upwards to allow all of this to happen. So let's say that you come in contact with like your common cold, right? And you start sneezing, but you're really tired because you've been pulling all-nighters at school, or you've been, burning the candle at both ends, whatever it is. And then as a result of that, you've been eating from the drive-through. Okay. So you really haven't been drinking enough water to begin with, but you've also been eating very dehydrating foods, and you haven't been getting enough sleep. There's probably a little stress in that also, right? So the liver gets a little upset when we get stressed, and it might be constraining. That's a recipe for getting an illness because the body now does not have what it needs. And I shouldn't say as generally the body, the sinews don't have what it needs, what they need to push this pathogen out. And so that's going to likely end up in you getting some sort of respiratory illness because those resources were deficient and your body couldn't get it out. So now it's stuck in the sinew layer. All right. Let's also use the example of allergies. Allergies are super common. And what do we do when we start getting allergies? We take antihistamines. This is one of the worst things that we could do for ourselves, because while it solves the problems of our symptoms, it is shoving down that pathogen deeper into the body. And this leads me to the next section that I want to talk about, which is the divergent channels. So let's say that pathology, that pollen, that allergen has now gone through the sinew layer. We've taken Zyrtec or NyQuil or whatever else to suppress the symptoms, and we've pushed it down deeper. What does it mean when we say we pushed it down deeper? In classical Chinese medicine, we use a type of channel that we call divergent channels. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is taking pathology and diverging it around the primary channels. So the sinews I mentioned in the beginning were the most superficial level of energy and of channels. And they're there to protect the primary channels, because the primary channels are the ones that are busy keeping us functioning every day, 24/7. And we want to protect them at all costs because they also resonate directly with the organs. So if the sinews have gotten something stuck there for whatever reason, and we can't get that out, the body may say, we need a little help with this. The sinews cannot hold this forever because we have to go back to work. We have to keep working to defend the exterior. So the deepest level of the body, the yuan level, we need you to help us hold this stuff. So we're going to just send down to you and let you store it away so that this person can continue on. They're not going to be sick forever. They're going to recover, and they're going to go on with their daily life. And they're certainly not going to die because we're going to hold this here for them. The divergent channels are holding pathology for us, but they require mediumship in order to do that. So if you follow me on Instagram, I'm often talking about resources. I use the word resources because it's a little more familiar and less scary than a word like mediumship, which I'm sure is not familiar unless you are operating in the classical Chinese medicine space. It's not a word I ever heard in acupuncture school. I only learned this when I studied classical medicine. But those words in my mind are interchangeable. Mediumship means the resources to store pathology and support the function of the body. Because as we are storing pathology in latency, in these resources, that uses resources. Okay, so think to yourself, I give you a heavy weight and I tell you, I want you to just hold on to this no matter what you do all day long. You're just going to hold. You're going to get tired, right? It depletes your energy to continue holding something that is very heavy. This is the best analogy that I can come up with to explain to you what's happening in the divergence. When it holds and holds and holds, it starts to lose that resource because it's tired. When a mediumship is losing its support, when it's becoming deficient, it loses its ability to hold. And one of the first signs that it is losing its ability to hold something is when we start getting joint pain. So this may happen for you in your 20s. It may happen for you in your 40s. Hopefully it never happens to you. But a lot of times people are starting to experience joint pain for the first time in their lives in midlife, mid 40s or late 30s, something like that, right? And they say, okay, I'm walking up the stairs, my knees hurt. Oh, this is just getting older. It's not getting older, it's getting depleted. And I think that that's a very significant difference, because as we get into the diet part, you will see how we rebuild a mediumship by what we eat, or either we destroy it by what we eat. Okay, so those symptoms are cropping up because the mediumship is getting depleted, because it's been holding this pathology that years ago we shoved down into latency to be held, and in hopes that we could get rid of it later. Can we say when the body will or will not get rid of it? Not really. That's not a question that we can really answer. When we take the pulse, someone comes in and they say, my joints are always hurting. I take their pulse and I can see that there's some pretty good mediumship here, actually. Okay, what we can do, but I rarely do, is we can consolidate all of those resources by using, let's just take the example of bladder divergent is what it would be called for acupuncturists who may be listening. We consolidate that resource of Jing and we do an SDS treatment. This refers to the needling techniques, shallow, deep, shallow, where we are using the energy of the sinews, taking that energy and going deep into the body to pull that pathology up to the surface and out. I have literally done this twice in my career so far. I've been in practice I've been practicing about 12 years at this point. And I'm just saying that in that time, that is not a common approach that I take to treating because it also is risky. What if I misjudge what the body is doing, how much resources it has? What if it can't really, we could throw that person into a crisis? Where we will never throw someone into a crisis is if we do the opposite. We say, okay, this person has these symptoms. I feel in the pulse, it could use a little more support here. So what we will do is help the body consolidate all of those resources in this divergent channel. We will coach the person on resting appropriately, hydrating through food appropriately, also perhaps mindset work in this case. Often is the case, addressing any unprocessed emotions because that gets in the way as well. And then this person will build the resources to not only have their symptoms go away, but then potentially the body can rid itself of what it was holding. And that's not something that we do directly. That's something that your body can choose to do. But either way, at that point, when you have built more resources, you don't have the symptoms that you came in with. And it's because your body has rebuilt the resources and can then contain the problem using those resources. What I want to talk about next is how this progresses from joint pain down into autoimmunity and diseases of the organ, and even what we call in Chinese medicine heat toxin, which translated into Western medical terms would look like a cancer. Okay, I'm going to show you this page from Anne Cecil Sturman's red book, the Advanced Acupuncture book, a clinical manual. And I just want to show you a chart that she has in here. When we have some joint pain, right? This could be the very first, we call them confluences, this first channel here. It says bladder kidney. And bladder kidney is our Jing, is what we call it. And maybe it's just getting a little shaky. You know, we just need a little bit of support. And I should mention too that regardless of where we are on this chart, it is always possible to dial it back and to heal yourself. So regardless of what your symptoms are, we can help you rewind the process if you're willing to make the changes. And I just want to show you this chart to show you how one does to some degree rely on the other. If you look down here in the fourth box, it will say heart, small intestine, and then underneath it, you'll see thick fluids. Thick fluids are made by eating fats, including saturated fats. So if we are not nourishing ourselves through saturated fats, we then also can't build thin fluids, which is the third box, stomach and spleen. And thin fluids have lots of functions in our bodies, but very simply, when we have dry eyes, dry mouth, dry throat, dry skin, dry all the things, this is a commentary on our thin fluids. And sinus infections are very often a result of not having good thin fluids. So this can be as simple as not drinking enough water and not eating enough hydrating foods, but it can also go back a box on this chart and be an issue of thick fluids where we need to be eating more fats so that we support that group of resources so that those resources can then support the thin fluids. Now, if you think about in Chinese or in allopathic medicine, if your blood volume drops, we've got a problem, right? So if you have had a traumatic accident or you're about to have surgery, you're always hooked up to hydration, IV hydration. We need enough thin fluids in order to make blood. And blood in Chinese medicine is super important. It's not just physiological, but it's also energetic, and it nourishes so many functions in our body. So if we're not eating in a really nourishing way and we're leaving out food groups, we run the risk of messing up all of these boxes. Okay, y'all, we're getting there. This is going to wrap up this episode where I want to talk to you about the specific diets. And I just picked 3 different ones. First, I want to talk about the low fat diet, which I think to some degree is really making its way out, because I think we are realizing as a society how helpful fat is. But I still do come across people and patients as well who say, I try to limit this or that. And I think also right now we're in this phase of having people increase their protein. And along with that, people are reducing their fat so that they can keep their calories low. So I think that's where it becomes important to talk about making sure that we include fat in our diets, because that 4th confluence is what we call it in classical Chinese medicine. In order to make thick fluids, we have to have enough fats in our diet, including saturated fats. When I say 4th confluence and thick fluids, this is referring to things like hormones, like neurotransmitters and cerebrospinal fluid, thick things that take a while to build. Like if you would imagine in your mind, producing hormones be like a fast process. Like it seems slow to me. So we have a lot of people out here these days saying, I have problems with my hormones. I have this issue because this hormone is off. But then if you look into the diet, like even people who they intend to be very conscientious and they're trying to do something good for themselves are avoiding fats, and especially saturated fats. And so one note on that I think is important to mention is that Chinese medicine views a clogged artery as the body responding to heat in the vessel. So how do we get heat in the vessel? Well, we have a lack of mediumship. We are hot and dry because we eat and drink things like onions, garlic, coffee, alcohol, sugar, chocolate, also fake foods on a regular basis. If you look at electrolytes, it is very difficult to find an electrolyte that does not have some fake sweetener. And I consider stevia a fake sweetener. Yes, it's a plant, but it goes through a lot of processing. And I know that there are some types of stevia that are better than others. I don't fully understand this yet myself. It's something I'm still trying to look into. But a lot of people say when I take these electrolytes, they help me in some way, but they also make me pee a lot. That's a sign that your sinews are trying to get that out of there. Okay. So a lot of us are doing a lot of things that become very depleting. We also have a lot of emotions that are unprocessed, a lot of feelings that we haven't dealt with. These things create heat in the body, and specifically heat in the blood and heat in the vessels. So when we see someone who has a clogged artery, some people who need stents, this is the result of there being heat in that vessel, and the body is responding with what in Chinese medicine we call damp. Think of it as like a balm or a salve to put out the fire. And then that builds and builds and builds. And because the person has not changed their dietary habits, they haven't changed like how they're thinking about the world, how they're feeling. They haven't addressed their unprocessed feelings and emotions and their thoughts. It just keeps going. And then they find themselves, having a heart attack. Okay. So that's the deal with low fat, non-fat foods and diet. We want to make sure we're including those, because also this realm of divergence is where we see a lot of autoimmunity. It's where we see multiple sclerosis. We can also see migraines in this section. So this is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're eating. We want to include fats. Second of all, I wanted to talk about veganism, because I myself was vegan for a stint about 1.5 years. I learned a lot doing it. I think there were lots of benefits. It made me expand what I was eating. I was not a dirty vegan. I was a clean eating vegan, meaning I did not eat a lot of the processed fake meats kind of thing. I just focused on whole grains and cooked vegetables. But without animal products, we are not getting the yang energy that we need to manufacture yin and other media. And in addition to that, if you think about meat itself, when it is uncooked, there is blood in it, right? It's gross. And it was very hard for me to go back to eating meat, but it was also imperative. I did not just say to myself one day, oh, I think I'll start eating meat. Anne treated me and she said, you have got to eat meat. You are done drinking coffee. She just put it to me straight and was like, you can heal from this, but you cannot do it continuing to eat in the way that you have been. And as I said, again, I was not a dirty vegan. I was really clean, but it just is not giving you the balance of energy that you need to make the resources to put those problems back into latency and move on. And at the time that she treated me, I had not long before that lost my ability to speak during a migraine. It obviously came back, but it was very severe. And I think at that point, it was a realization for me that I couldn't be fucking around. Like I had to take it seriously or what was going to happen next. The last diet I wanted to talk about too, which has become really popular, opposite of veganism, is the carnivore diet, where people are eating loads and loads and loads of meat. So I know that I just got done saying how important it is to include meat in the diet. And I also do want to make one caveat about that. Veganism to me is drastically different than vegetarianism. If you are vegetarian and you are eating some animal products like butter and maybe eggs, I think your outcomes are drastically different. If you think about a lot of Indian food that is vegetarian, it still does have ghee or butter or heavy cream. It's including lots of fats, okay? As opposed to modern vegan diets, like Western vegan diets often are very low in fats. And they're also very cold, and they don't include enough yang energy to help build the yin. Okay, so back to the carnivore diet. The opposite of veganism is also not good because it's too far on the continuum. If you literally imagine a continuum for everything, we want to be balanced. And being balanced means including things along the continuum. If we are eating, let's like put meat on the right side, and then like let's put like veganism on the left, the far left side. We want cooked vegetables, of course, and we want cooked grains, and we want beans, and we want seeds and nuts. And we can also enjoy raw food and fruits. But if we're doing too much raw food and too much cold food and no animal products, then we're too far to the left. We need to move to the right a little bit. And really what we're trying to do is move to the center by using these things from the right side so that we get a nice, warm, soupy pot. Okay, so the classical Chinese medicine view of the stomach is that it's called a bubbling cauldron. And I tell people modern day, think about a crock pot. Unless you just don't put enough liquid and it dries out, usually a crock pot is going to be warm and wet the whole time. And it's a little bit of a simmer going the whole time you're cooking something in the crock pot. Think about your stomach being like this. And if we go so far to the right that we're eating tons and tons of meat with no carbohydrates, we're not supporting the spleen and the stomach, which are critical for transforming what we put into our body in general into usable materials. So we don't want to do anything extreme. I will probably die on this hill, but we are never going to achieve balance by doing extreme things. I recorded a previous podcast about this very topic, highlighting a lot of practices that are very extreme that people are doing because they think somehow it is going to correct their health problems and bring them somehow into balance. Good health is a product of being balanced in all the ways. And so if we are going to an extreme, either one end or the other, that is never going to bring us to the middle, which is balancing the scales. Okay. So I'm hoping that from giving you the example of a carnivore diet, what that does, but also the veganism example, but then also the low fat diet, then you can see the differences, and then you can probably fill in the blanks for all the other crazy things. But in general, the gist is we need a balance of energies to bring us into balance. So please do not go down the extreme rabbit holes. And that concludes this episode. We got through it. Hallelujah. In this episode, I wanted to highlight for you how clean eating trends can look different ways, but usually in the end, it's doing you dirty because it's not supporting the mediumship that you need to support good health from a Chinese medicine perspective. And I hope by talking about how the sinews are our most exterior protection and they try to keep everything out anyway, but then what happens when they aren't able to keep everything out, and the importance of really having good resources so that your body can support you on a deeper level when and if it needs to. And then if you are finding yourself in a health problem right now, these things that are chronic, they're degenerative, they keep getting worse, they're complicated, those things can absolutely be healed. We just have to change how we're looking at it. And the Western world does not give us a framework for reversing that disease. They just look at it like, we can help you manage it and you will feel better and be able to live a long, healthy life, most likely. But what we're saying in classical Chinese medicine is no, actually, we can reverse that by using divergent treatments to consolidate the resources that you have. And then we're going to coach you on this dietary piece. And also, we're going to look at your emotions and your mindset and see how that could be driving a heat pattern as well. And we're going to roll all that back. And then it looks like magic, but it's really just medicine. Thanks for joining, y'all.